Hi, everyone. Welcome to Anthro Day, hosted by Minorities in Anthropology at UCSC. I would like to introduce Dr. and Professor Alejandra Kramer from the UCSC Anthropology Department. She is an anthropologist. She teaches here at UCSC. I've taken 2 of her classes, which are fantastic, and I highly recommend if you're a student here. Her classes focus on gender, politics, media, ethnography, and ethnographic methods. In a prior, less academic life, she was a ski instructor, a language interpreter, a surf nonprofit foundation founder. In her present life, she continues to be a fiction, poetry, and jazz enthusiast and a dedicated knitter. I'll hand it over to you, Professor Kramer.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am so happy to be here for this Anthro Day. So happy Anthro Day to everybody. And we have some really great presentations coming up. So I'm going to keep my comments short. But Brent asked me to talk a little bit about anthropology and minorities in anthropology, a group that I know well, even though I don't participate very much because you guys seem to participate among students, which is great. I, as you can hear from my accent, was not born in the United States. So I've had that expat and immigrant background that really pushed me towards anthropology as I was thinking about a career. Early on, I studied law, and then eventually I migrated towards anthropology, which made a lot more sense to me in terms of interest and in terms of my own lived experience. And I was thinking that minorities in anthropology is what anthropology is all about and has always been all about, which is different people doing things differently in different settings and interpreting their physical environment and their conceptual environments, right, in their own way, and modifying them and borrowing and exchanging, right? So the distinction between minorities in anthropology and anthropology seems to be a very tenuous one nowadays. So with that, and I thought, I went into the AAA website today to see what activities they had for Anthro Day, and I wanted to share my screen if I could, Brent. I might not be able to if I'm not allowed, but I saw a really
No, you should be able to.
Okay, I saw a really nice quote, and I wanted to share it with you because I found it very telling. And it says here that I find anthropology a marvelous discipline to shock me out of my own world and into another world. And I think that this is what's always attracted me to anthropology, is this sense of being able to live in different worlds, right? Those of us who are bicultural or tricultural or multicultural know how this works, right? How you live in different worlds. You are not the same person in those different worlds, right? And anthropology helps us understand the mechanisms of that shape shifting, right? And then other than that, I thought I would leave you with this other quote from David Graeber, which I really like, which is the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we make. And I think that this is something anthropologists know very well, cultural anthropologists especially, and could just as easily make differently, right? So this possibility in anthropology, in our research, to change the things that are not fair, that we don't like, that we want to make better. Anyways, so I'm going to stop sharing here, and I am going to introduce our first presenter, which is this is going to be wonderful. This is Ameyalli de la Rosa and community, who will present Our Ancestors Will Guide Us, the Danza Conchera tradition. Ameyalli, there you are, hello, is a third-year transfer student who is working towards an anthropology major and a Latin American Latinx studies minor. Her passion for indigenous traditions, specifically traditional music and devotional rituals, is inspired by being born and raised in the Danza Conchera tradition. As someone whose upbringing was bicultural, she is also interested in the complexities of Chicanx identities and the way that cultures shift with migration. And I know they are going to present a dance, right? So it's all yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Ameyalli de la Rosa, and this is other members of our community, of our group, Kelaya Acevedo and Ezra Tenoch Hernandez, who are here with me today. Primeramente, hablando con el permiso de Dios y nuestras ánimas benditas, first we want to thank the Creator, the Divine, our ancestors, and and the guardians of these lands, the original caretakers of these lands, the Amamutsun, and all of the original people of this land, which we call home. Thank you for being here. Is it sharing? Sorry, the presentation.
Okay.
Okay. I hope all of you can see the PowerPoint, which this is just a small introduction to la tradición de Danza de Concheros. Some history is that the Conchero tradition is an indigenous tradition from central Mexico. There's many names to Danza Conchera. Danza Tolteca Chichimeca, Danza Mexica, Danza Azteca. Our offerings consist of dances, music, candles, flowers, prayers, sweat, struggle, beauty, and a lot more. We dedicate these offerings to the sacred images that our communities venerate and have venerated for a really long time. These traditions are syncretic, which is how they survived the turmoil of colonization. In the 16th century, even after different religious images were imposed, even after churches were built on the rubble of our ancient temples, we continued to venerate and we continued our pilgrimages to these sites and we continued to make our offerings. Syncretism is interesting because in the case of the Americas, different indigenous peoples, long before colonization, we have always shared ceremonial spaces and shared traditions. So people from different cultures, different regions, different indigenous groups have come together. And that means that there's different languages, different forms, different names for the divine, and different ways to venerate the divine. And for us, that never mattered because we understand that there's many ways, many forms, and many different languages to reach the divine. And this is why our ancestors were able to preserve our traditions and continuing their pilgrimages to these sacred sites. We never ceased our veneration. And these are some pictures of our animas, our ancestors, a few of them only, which are the people that basically dedicated their lives to the preservation of these traditions, of our specific lineage in this tradition. This image is an image of a procession in Mexico City, which was just barely this past July. And I included this image because I want to highlight that we exist in the present. We exist now. We don't exist in the past. Our clothing, our rituals, our music is not just folkloric dance. It's not an imitation or an artistic rendition of American indigeneity. The essence of our rituals is being in conversation with the divine and our ancestors through the language of these forms, which we have been taught. So yeah, I just really want to show you this image of danzantes concheros in Mexico City still being us, because we don't think of ourselves as in the past, and we don't put on these clothes to be in the past. So yeah. And this is a little bit of what we look like, some more what we look like now. Danza has spread all over Mexico, the United States, even Europe. On the top right image, every banner that you see, every estandarte that you see, represents a specific lineage, a specific branch of this really big tree that is danza. And this is just one ceremony. There's this ceremony where that picture was here in Gilroy, and there's hundreds of ceremonies throughout the year in many places. On the bottom right is a picture of the people who embark on the pilgrimage to La Basílica de la Virgen de Guadalupe, which our ancestors have been embarking on this pilgrimage for thousands of years. And today, millions of people still go to this sacred site. Again, just to highlight that our traditions are not just a historical, cultural heritage, it's very much a part of our everyday lives. Indigenous people are not just one way. We come from cities, towns, different states, different countries. We have different skin colors. We speak different languages. We have different histories. We embody the complexities of survival in spite of modernity. And we're very much here today. What we have experienced in our communities, especially kind of like in the diaspora, but in all of our communities on this continent, we have experienced a lot of violence, exploitation, disconnection, but we're a lot more than that, too. Danza, historically and currently, is a space of healing, of medicine, empowerment, and resistance. So we are Grupo Naucampa. Our lineage, our mesa, is la mesa de la Señora Santana Tlazolteo y el Santo Niño de Atocha Xochipilli. And we've been working in the Gilroy area for more than 10 years, and we would like to invite you to our practices where everybody is welcome. And now we would like to continue and hopefully, even though it's over Zoom, share with you guys a little bit of the experience of what danza feels like, what danza sounds like, and what it looks like. Thank you. Él es Dios.
Thank you, Ameyalli and company. I'm instructed here that if we have questions for the concheros, the dancers, we should ask them now because they have something else to do. And all other questions from other presenters we will keep until the end of the panel. But if you have any questions for Ameyalli or her partners here, you can ask them now. Thank you, Ameyalli.
Thank you.
Actually, I don't see, I have a question. I am curious, I didn't know anything about Danza Conchera, and it's beautiful. Thank you so much for that presentation and the performance. Why are the conchas used? Why are the shells used? Since this is a dance that originates in the middle of Mexico, where did they come from?
Yeah, so we have a concha de armadillo, and that's why we're called concheros, because of the armadillo shell that kind of represents the syncretism of our existence. Yeah. So this is a gourd, but this is the instrument, the concha. So it's kind of a good representative of the way that we changed, evolved, and adapted in order to persevere through colonization. And many instruments were introduced, stringed instruments were introduced to Mexico, to the American continent, with the ships that carried people from Europe, but also people from, as we know, Spain is a country that was for hundreds of years ruled by the Muslim Empire, by North Africa, Marruecos. So what we see as the stringed instrument historically is something that comes from, the Middle East, and over many centuries made its way to us through various other cultural exchanges that happened in Europe and made its way to us. So for us, where many years we were not allowed to use drums, for example, and so we were able to adopt, we don't consider to be like a replacement, but something that is joined. So something that, what's the word? Instead of a replacement, something that is like enrichment. Now we have more instruments, which are a part of our tradition. And all of our indigenous peoples of the American continent have shifted and taken on all these different instruments and these ways of incorporating these instruments into their traditions. So we have, I'm sure there's countless in the American continent, North and South America, of these new instruments. But that is why we have this stringed instrument, because we incorporated it with these cultural exchanges or imposition. But really, I don't think the guitar was imposed. I think that we, as indigenous people, were able to take things and make it our own, which is, I think, why we have survived, because we're able to take things and now it has become something new, because this is not something that you will find anywhere else in the world. This instrument, the conchas de armadillo, and the way that we use them is unique to us. So I would say that is where it came from. And the reason why we continue to use them is because the way that our traditions were passed down to us, there's many essential songs, alabanzas, and basically sacred songs that we use as a part of our ceremonies to call on our ancestors, or as a part of our offerings. So we consider that through the strings is how we reach, say, the divine, how we reach other dimensions, how we reach our ancestors. So it's like a sacred thing to us that through our voices, through our instruments, that is how we are reaching beyond us. So that is why we are called concheros, and that is why this is a sacred instrument to us. These
Thank
strings.
you. Thank you so much. Anybody else has questions?
Hi.
Annapurna,
Hi,
go ahead.
Alejandra.
Hello.
Hi, it's Annapurna Pandey. Wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed the dance and music. I was just wondering that it's so wonderful that how you have kept the tradition and the way you are reviving and the way you are just practicing the dance and music. So how did you learn the tradition?
I learned the tradition through my
You and your group, I meant.
Okay. So a lot of the ways that these traditions were passed down was through families and it's been that way for a long time. So it's sort of hereditary, but for example, my parents, my dad, our jefes, the people who lead our group, who unfortunately weren't able to join us today, they, like my dad and Makwil, our jefa, she is now the third generation of dancers in her family. So to my dad in his lifetime, he was dancing with my mom before I was born, and he went searching to Mexico because he learned here in California. He went searching to Mexico to meet with different elders because there's many different lineages, and so basically became a part of a specific lineage, which is the lineage that he represents and the teachings that was taught to him by those elders. So anybody could essentially meet people from this tradition, incorporate themselves, and decide if they feel called to learn these traditions. There's many different aspects of these rituals. They're very complex, and we consider that it takes a lifetime. It's a lifetime of learning. So that is how we come to learn. So now those people who represent specific lineages have created a space here in the area, in Gilroy and in Santa Cruz, to teach other people how to dance, how to sing, and other parts of the ritual. And we also host our ceremonies here, which is not just a practice, it's our offerings in their context. So anybody could learn them, but we learn from our elders, which are very old lineages, hundreds of years of lineage. Some of the photos that I showed you in the PowerPoint are some of our ancestors, our elders.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else has a question? Okay. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I want to hear when you have another performance, because I want to go see the whole group and in vivo y en directo, not like this via Zoom. So let us know.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So at Barrios Unidos, which is the organization here in Santa Cruz, they're hosting an event for Black History Month, which is this at 7 at 6:45. And they right now today. So they asked us to open the space and offer some danzas there. So if you want to right now, we will all be there at Barrios Unidos.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck. Now our next presenter is Zoe Shmidt, who is here. I see you. Hi there. Zoe is a fourth-year transfer student working towards an anthropology major and a biology major. She has chosen to focus on biology molecular anthropology. Zoe is currently working as a lab technician within the UCSC Paleogenomics lab to complete her thesis project, and recently concluded an internship with the UCSC Genomics Institute as an educational writer on the Genome Browser team. Primarily interested in genetics, Zoe aspires to one day complete an MD or a DO program and work as a physician specializing in integrative and preventative healthcare with an emphasis in genomic-specific care. She hopes her background in anthropology will allow her to take a holistic approach within her medical practice and effectively serve individuals from multiple diverse communities. She's also an artist with a passion for painting, calligraphy, and creative writing. Welcome, Zoe.
Hello, thank you for that introduction. And I want to say thank you to the dancers. That was such an incredible performance and a great way to kick this all off. All righty, let me share my screen. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Awesome. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Zoe, and my presentation is going to be regarding genetic analysis on human remains, specifically on my thesis project. So as you all just heard in my bio, I work within the UCSC Paleogenomics Laboratory, and we do a lot of different stuff, but one thing we do is extract and sequence DNA from human remains samples anywhere from like 50 to 10,000 years old. Here's a funny photo of me in the lab. We have to enter dressed in full PPE gear to make sure that we don't contaminate any of the samples with modern human DNA. So my thesis project's title is Optimization of a Minimally Invasive DNA Extraction Protocol for Human Dental Remains, which is really just a long fancy way of saying that I'm trying to improve a method for extracting DNA from human remains, specifically from teeth. So there are a few different procedures used to extract DNA from human remains. Usually a small section of the bone, such as a tooth root, is cut off of the sample, and then that piece is pulverized and DNA is extracted from that bone powder. The problem with this is that it's obviously very destructive and the sample has been irreversibly damaged. However, a method described in a 2020 paper by Harney et al., dubbed the DIP method, doesn't require any bone pulverization. This method is considered minimally invasive because it doesn't require any sample destruction. The SparkNotes version of how this method works is instead of cutting off a root and pulverizing it, the tooth root is dipped into an extraction buffer and incubated overnight. Some of the root is eaten away by the buffer. How much really depends on the sample's quality of preservation, but it is leaps and bounds less destructive than pulverization. So I want to take a second to talk about why the DIP method works. How can you get the same high frequencies of DNA from dipping a tooth root in buffer as you can from pulverizing the entirety of the root and sequencing the DNA within that powder? Well, it comes down to tooth anatomy. So the cementum, which is the outside layer of the tooth root boxed in red in this diagram, has an extremely high level of DNA, much more than the dentin, which is the internal part of the root. This is because the cementum undergoes the most cell turnover, meaning that cell replication is prolific and frequent in this part of the tooth. And this is why the DIP method can be so successful. When the root is immersed in the extraction buffer, the buffer eats away at that cementum and releases lots of DNA into the buffer liquid, DNA that can later be sequenced. So the DIP method works well because the cementum has high levels of DNA. Great, but there is a problem with this method. Because the cementum is the external layer of the tooth, it also has high levels of contamination. Some of these teeth have been exposed to the elements for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and you can only imagine the different types of contamination that might be present. Animal DNA, plant DNA, bacterial DNA, not to mention modern human DNA. So my project is focused on trying to solve this issue, to decrease the levels of contamination while not sacrificing endogenous DNA levels. Endogenous DNA is just a fancy way of saying DNA from the sample itself. What my project entails is treating the roots with what is called a buffer exchange before the overnight extraction buffer incubation process. My thought is that perhaps exposing roots to the extraction buffer for a small period of time before the overnight incubation may eat away at that contaminant DNA. Then when the teeth do undergo the overnight incubation, the contaminants have already been removed from the surface of the cementum and only endogenous DNA is being extracted. So a little warning before I show the next slide. The next slide shows pictures of a few of my samples. They're molar teeth, not gruesome in any capacity, but obviously I'm working with human remains, and I did want to give a heads up before I show any pictures, just in case anyone is sensitive to that kind of content. So feel free to look away or do whatever you got to do to make yourself feel comfortable. Okay. So I'm trying to answer two questions. Does exposing the roots to a buffer exchange lower contaminant DNA levels? And what period of time is optimal for that buffer exchange in order to get rid of a majority of those contaminants while not jeopardizing endogenous DNA? To do this, I'm currently working with a pilot study of 6 teeth, each with 3 roots, as shown in these photos. So each of those 3 roots is being exposed to a different protocol before their main overnight incubation. One is being exposed to a 30-minute buffer exchange, one is being exposed to an hour buffer exchange, and the last root isn't getting a buffer exchange at all. I'm hoping that by comparing the final contaminant and endogenous DNA levels between the 3 roots of each tooth will give me a better idea of whether or not a buffer exchange decreases contamination, and if so, which time interval is the most successful and does not jeopardize the DNA we do want. Once I get these results, I have more samples, and then I can do more tests to further support my preliminary data. So why is this kind of work important? Well, the destruction of human remains is a sensitive topic, and this is really warranted. In a lot of cultures, this type of destruction is seen as a desecration of ancestral remains. As anthropologists, we have a responsibility to respect and work within the ideological bounds of the communities we are working with. The goal is to work alongside these communities, and that means first and foremost listening to their voices and concerns and respecting their boundaries. So I'm hoping that by optimizing this new minimally destructive extraction method, I will make it an even more appealing procedure to other molecular anthropologists and further encourage them to use this method. I want to make it as appealing as possible, which means making it as effective and efficient as possible. I'm hoping that this kind of work can have a positive impact and foster collaboration between these communities and paleogenomic research. By modifying traditional Western scientific procedures to be more culturally and ethically conscious, we as anthropologists can better serve the interest of multiple and diverse communities. Thank you everyone for your time. I hope you all enjoyed.
Oop, you're muted, Professor Kramer.
I am so sorry. I thought I wasn't. I was saying that this is so interesting as a non-bio, as a cultural anthropologist. I'm always fascinated by what you guys do and what archaeologists do. And I have a question, but I don't want to be the first one to go with a question again, because it's a very pedestrian question. So I see that there are some people here who are bioanthropologists. Maybe they want to ask you a question first. Or not. Maybe not. So I'm going to ask the question. It's really, what is a buffer exchange and what is it made of, and how is it so, how does it, without getting too technical, how does it get away the contaminants from the tooth root?
So a buffer exchange is really just a lysis buffer. It's the same thing we use to extract the DNA. It breaks open the cells and releases the DNA into the liquid. I don't want to get too scientific, but that's kind of like your basic protocol. So what a buffer exchange is exposing the root to that lysis buffer before its main buffer incubation process to kind of like eat away at those first layers of DNA, which are usually contaminant.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, of course.
Okay, Helena, hi, how are you? You have a question.
Hi, I do have a question. Yeah, this is a this is a science analysis question. My question is, once you get your results from your initial pilot study, how are you going to go about deciding which one of those three options, right? The 0 or the 30-minute buffer exchange or the 1 hour. How are you going to decide which one has given you the best results?
So each tooth has 3 roots, and I'm going to expose each of those roots to a different time interval. And depending on, once we get that DNA sequenced, that extracted DNA sequenced, we'll know how high those endogenous DNA levels are, how high those contaminant DNA levels are, and our library complexity for all of those different roots. And library complexity is just like how complete the DNA is, like how many fragments we got. So let's say like my 30-minute roots have really high library complexity and really high endogenous DNA levels, but my hour incubation roots have like lower endogenous DNA levels. Then I'll know that the hour incubation period went too far into the tooth and it started to eat away at that endogenous DNA. So it's really just going to be about comparing those 3 different roots of each tooth and seeing which one is that like hits that sweet spot, which time interval would he hit that little sweet spot. And then I'll do some more tests on other tooth roots. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have a question? Doesn't sound like it. Thank you, Zoe. That was really interesting. And you have to come back to us with your final results somehow. Okay.
I'll let you
Thanks.
guys know. Thank you.
Yes, please. Our next presenter is Brent Horning, our masterminder today, since he organized this meeting, and this is quite a deed that you've achieved here. Brent is a senior transfer slug and geriatric millennial majoring in anthropology, focused on South Asian spiritual traditions. He holds certifications as a massage therapist, yoga and meditation instructor. And I have to add here that I can ascertain that because in one of our classes, we started every class with some yoga and meditation, and that really changed the dynamic of the class. It was a small class. It was great. He's also a drug and alcohol addiction counselor and has worked in many diverse holistic and clinical environments. He's a founding member of the UCSC branch of the Lambda Alpha Anthropology Honors Society and the main event organizer for this year's Anthro Day program. He plans to continue ethnographic Indic research and pursue a PhD in anthropology or ethnomusicology. For the second half of 2022, he lived in West Bengal in India. He studied Bangla language, sponsored by the Critical Language Scholarship, and conducted ethnographic thesis fieldwork with the Benjamin A. Gilman Scholarship. Welcome, Brent.
Thank you very much, Professor Kramer. Today, I will focus on 2 examples that are little microcosms of my larger experiences and thesis arguments. The first are disposable terracotta clay teacups. Tea or cha stands are everywhere in India. The price is about 10 rupees or 12 cents for one of these tiny cups filled with street cha, or what we usually call cha or chai. These cups were endlessly enchanting to me, and once my digestion stabilized and I mustered the courage to try street food, I made sidewalk cha a part of my routine every time I went out. The birth to death cycle of these little cups is brief, but infused with life. Made by hand, they embody the earthy embrace of Mother India. Savored on wildly busy street corners, providing a brief reprieve for anyone who can afford it, a ticket into connection that Bengalis call adda, or leisurely conversation. Then discarded on the sidewalk or in a rare trash receptacle, they make their way back towards union with the earth. The street cha experience provided a through line and somatic touchstone for my time in India. It was an avenue to connect with strangers, practice speaking Bangla, rejuvenate myself when I felt exhausted and overwhelmed. It's one of the many organic traditions that persists alongside rapidly growing industrialization and technological advances in South Asia. As you can see here, this is a post I shared with the Critical Language Scholarship, which was the first 2 of the 6 months I spent in India. The CLS Bangladesh language intensive first got me thinking about the lingering effects of colonization in India. Luckily, the timing of the scholarship positioned for me to be there for a highly anticipated Durga Puja festival season following 2 years of COVID and brand new recognition by UNESCO. This festival is a stunning flower of Hinduism, which even itself is a colonial term given by outsiders. The more accurate term is Sanatan Dharma, eternal order. Within this rich and diverse collection of spiritual traditions, there remains one of the most intact goddess-worshipping cultures amongst a world primarily worshipping gods. Durga is a fierce battleground goddess, summoned by the other gods as a Hail Mary against the exponentially multiplying buffalo demon Mahishasura and his hordes, who threatens to destroy the universe in the Devi Mahatmya scripture. During Durga Puja, outdoor neighborhood shrines with sculptures of Durga are venerated, sometimes alone and sometimes with her relations, including Shiva, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kartik, and Ganesh. The martial imagery of Durga has been utilized by elites for centuries, which I will examine deeper in my thesis. From the wealthy Bengali landowners in the 1400s to the diplomatic displays for the British during the 17 and 1800s, this fierce goddess has been used by many men to support their consolidation of power. Nonetheless, she embodies spiritual victory and good triumphing over evil. She is considered as a family member during Durga Puja season, leaving many teary-eyed to see her depart. The massive scale of Durga Puja celebrations on the streets of Kolkata expresses the social agreement and profound understanding that God and Goddess are close. They are family members, alive on the shrines. The second microcosmic example I will share is the common use of the word idol to refer to the sacred sculptures which are used in Hindu worship during Durga Puja. In this tradition, they aren't considered idols as the word is commonly understood in English as a false god. They are a literal and embodied deity to believers, as they have undergone the ritual which gives them life essence. Nonetheless, most Bengalis I spoke with would regularly refer to the sacred statues as idols. Even though the words murti or protima are in their vocabulary and more appropriately reflect the sacred nature, idol is the word used by most everyone, ranging from sculptors to priests. This raised interesting questions and brought my attention to other ways that the puritanical influence of the British remained as colonial residue. How is colonization expressed outside of literal geopolitical domination? Of unique importance last year was the new recognition of the Durga Puja celebrations in West Bengal by UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. It has been inscribed on the list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity, and hopes are high in India that this will bring in more tourists to Durga Puja and increase revenue and global recognition. UNESCO has done priceless work in preserving historic sites and traditions, but there remains a controversial view of some decision makers and neo-globalism, which sometimes results in endangering the preserved sites with an influx of tourists. There are parallels with how Durga Puja originated as a display of status and how that tradition continues today with its most prestigious recognition yet. How does the outsider gaze affect the way these ancient traditions get shown to the world? One way to explore this is by comparing Durga Puja in the rural parts of West Bengal with the more cosmopolitan pujas in Kolkata. Many people in Kolkata consider Durga Puja a secular arts festival, despite the fact its origin is religious and each pandal, or outdoor shrine, has ritual performed by a priest. In Kolkata, animal sacrifice in temples is largely illegal and infrequently performed at major temples. There is even a bright neon sign proclaiming no animal sacrifice at this temple. In contrast, in the villages, goats are sacrificed frequently, sometimes pools of half-mopped-up blood lingering on the marble walkways outside. These two different examples, one of the terracotta teacups And secondly, the common use of a single taken for granted word, idol, are a small peek into the direction I'm headed with my thesis and the Indic research I plan to continue as I pursue my PhD. In conclusion, I invite you to come see my ethnographic photo exhibit in this very room with some of my favorite photos from my trip. Photo documentation was an unexpectedly delightful part of my research, which helped keep me grounded and with a consistent creative outlet when stress levels were high. It also proved an evocative interface between me and the many Indians who I met on the street. I received many selfie requests, and cognizant of the prevalent racism in India, I was aware that many people were drawn to me in part because of my skin color. This raised questions about the idealization of whiteness and westernization, and if it was appropriate to take selfies with everyone who asks, if it enforces any racial hierarchy. This is explored in a portion of my exhibit called Selfies with Strangers, a selection from the hundreds of selfies I took with strangers. I'll conclude with some words from Octavio Paz from In Light of India. I sat at the foot of a huge tree, a statue of the night, and tried to make an inventory of all I had seen, heard, smelled, and felt. Dizziness, horror, stupor, astonishment, joy, enthusiasm, nausea, inescapable attraction. What had attracted me? It was difficult to say. Humankind cannot bear much reality. Yes, the excess of reality had become an unreality. But that unreality had turned suddenly into a balcony from which I peered into what? Into that which is beyond and still has no name. Thank you. Oh, you're muted.
Again, I was going to say that that was lovely and so interesting and made me think about so many things. And I was also saying that I broke the rule and had asked questions of Zoe after her presentation. So we'll keep on doing it.
Sure.
And I'll ask people to ask you questions if they have any. It's really wonderful to hear that your time spent in Bengal was so interesting and productive. Annapurna, do you have a question?
Fantastic presentation, Brent. Not a question, rather I'm just kind of wondering that you said the use of idol that you heard in Kolkata. I was just wondering, because just a kind of curiosity, what would they say in the villages?
Same.
Idol?
Yeah.
Like in Bangla, what would they say?
They say a lot of people still use, even in Bangla, they'll still, not everyone, but they'll still sometimes use the English word idol. In Bangla, because I, couldn't track every conversation translatably because I'm still learning, so I'm not sure completely, but the time I was there, which that wasn't the longest period of time that I spent in the villages, but when I was there, I believe I did hear people still calling the idol when they would speak in English or a mix of English and Bangla.
Interesting, because since it's also a question of who you mingled with, naturally, because to hear that, because when I was doing my field work, the Buddha's birthplace, and people of course, there was a kind of a politically, everybody was claiming that Buddha was born in the village there in Odisha, but at the same time, for the people, Buddha was not an idol, or Buddha was not the kind of the name that people were talking about, but Buddha was the child. Buddha was very much the part of the family. It's a kind of and celebrating a child's birthday. So I was just wondering, because I have heard a lot about the word ma, that even in Bangla, that and so I was just wondering, what would the villagers say?
I mean, definitely they call her, by her name Ma or Durga also, but just in the context of like, how do I say, like if they're, let's see, it's kind of hard to parse because there's like all these different layers of embodiment in the sacred statues, you know, depending on
Yeah.
what part of the ritual they've gone through. But
Yeah.
oftentimes they would refer to her as Ma or Durga or
Yeah.
Ma Durga. But then definitely, oftentimes when they'd be referring to the statue, it would be the idol. So maybe sometimes when the statue was being discussed in terms
Yeah.
of like its decoration or its transportation or something.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, but how that very interesting the way how that word lasts and the way you are kind of referring to that makes perfect sense that you would say, and interesting that you can see in the process of colonization when Octavia Paz says that kind of very much is invoking the unknown and this kind of the other world. So it's very interesting to kind of juxtapose the two. Yeah.
yeah, it's thanks to your class that I found that quote because actually I took Professor Pundi's Cultures of India class when I was in India. I took it asynchronously online and it provided a really, it made everything even more intense because I was learning more about the culture than I had ever known before and from perspectives that I wouldn't have sought out on my own. So it was very
The way you have picked it up, the way you are analyzing the material, that's fascinating. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you.
Wishing you all the luck for in-depth analysis and for your PhD.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thank you. Anybody else has a question for Brent? Doesn't seem like it. I was just going to add that I had no idea that Octavio Paz had gone to India, and I really like his work, but I wasn't aware that he had spent time in India. And again, how everything is related, right? And we had some Conchero dancers from Mexico, and now Octavio Paz is in India.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
I think he
It's
was the first.
yeah.
I think he was the first. Professor Pandi can correct me, but I believe he was the first diplomat from Mexico to India, like in mid 1900s. So his memoir about that journey and his time in India is, I highly recommend it.
Definitely, I'll look into it. Okay, thank you so much, Brent.
Thank you.
And our next presenter, it's going to be a video. Are you going to show? How are we going to do this, Brent? Don't
I'll
go
do
away.
it. I'll do a screen share. So after you introduce, then
Okay.
I'll do a screen share.
Perfect. So the next presenter who cannot be here because they are very busy with a upcoming project is Lavender Higley, who is a senior transfer to UCSC after beginning their education in cultural anthropology and dance at San Diego Mesa College. While in San Diego, Lav also danced with Visionary Dance Theater, with Mojalet Dancer Collective Core Group, and in multiple international fringe festivals. Since coming to Santa Cruz, they have joined the UC history books as a choreographer come director of Random with a Purpose, which is the show that is going to be presented here at UC, and a producer cum director of Queer Fashion Show. Lav's work centers queer embodiment and communication, especially as an intersection, but they also pursue research into sex, gender, social justice, and the arts more broadly, as well as religion, spirituality, and the occult. They find the insights of queer and dance theories with their understanding of identity, body, internal experience, and external observation to be infinitely applicable in studies of culture and the human. And so now we're going to see a video that they put together for us. And I'm going to read a little bit about it. The following video was created for a group project in Dr. Anand Singh's class, Anthropology and the Anthropocene. It uses text from her interactive web book, Feral Atlas, to create a visual metaphor for how infrastructures of long-distance transport affect previously isolated ecosystems. And so unfortunately, Lavender is in final rehearsals for a UCSC dance show and is unable to join us for Q&A, but here is the video.
Once, An emperor's favored concubine watched anxiously for the dust a fly off hooves, bringing lychees from the south. Once, American ladies fainted with the acceleration of trains. Now we pay no mind to swollen-bellied cargo ships and planes, to swarms of ever-moving trucks and trains. We laugh at the thought that some things happen only in place. Take.
Okay, how do we clean this up?
That was great. That was excellent. Okay, so it's too bad we don't have Lavender to ask them questions because this is really interesting. We'll move on then. And our last presenter is Veronica Solis, who joined us from Houston. Vero is one of the MIA founders and is currently a PhD student at Rice University. A proud first gen and a former undocumented student. Her research interests are multi-species, decolonization, forest, landscape, and memory. She has founded art community projects in San Francisco and served there as a community liaison for the art community. Currently, she collaborates with an interdisciplinary research team in Mexico that focuses on the conservation of agave. She is working on urban community projects in Mexico City and Acapulco, using her art and human rights studies as a bridge for multi-species community dialogue. And Vero, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good.
I'm sorry,
there you are.
I've been having trouble with my computer. That's why I was logging in and out, but I hope
welcome.
it doesn't fail me. Yeah.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay, so I'm gonna share my where I am. So many screens. So this work that I'm doing, it's work in progress of a site that I started to visit in 2021 on summer. And I keep following. So, okay, so this and this. We are getting ready to land and start descending. From the airplane, it is hard to differentiate if the density of the air is fog or smoke. That makes me wonder if breathing this air is hard on the butterflies. In 1992, United Nations said Mexico City's air is the most polluted on the planet. A decade later, there was no change in the statement. The air in winter is the worst. In the city, the air in winter is the worst in the city as there is no rain or air currents to clean it. The air gets cleaner in the summer with the monsoon rains. So how the butterflies spread? Every time I arrive in the city, I ponder if the insect is still there and if it survives in such contaminated air. For those answers, I need to step aside from anthropology. Our planet has undergone different geological events, and some species remarkably evolved to cope with many environmental changes. Evolution equipped butterflies with the spiracles, the tiny pores in their abdomen that let air get into their trachea. But also, if they are non-mobile, they take less oxygen, close their spiracles, recycle the oxygen, and can survive without constant breathing. Also, evolution equipped them with sensors on their feet to taste food, so they don't breathe through their mouth. Can you imagine if we had the bad tasters on our feet? We would walk the soil, we would keep the soil cleaner to taste the air when walking. I notice few host plants every time I visit the city. Since the first time I saw the butterflies, I counted at least 8 host plant spots for the Phoebus phylea colony. The second time I visited the site, there were 4, most of them trimmed or with broken branches. When I'm in the city, after breakfast, the first thing on my head is to check the caterpillars and the chrysalids. I go for some 30 minutes of observation, then back in the afternoon, sometimes checking them at night if I pass by. Witnessing the different stages and their metamorphosis has also changed something in me. I see them differently. My mind tries to grasp their imagining cells at work. The gooey genes, mold ones, making a part of the exoskeleton or some other organs. The squirming chrysalis as a little sac. Inside genes, molting again. Sometimes the pupa twists to one side, then the other. I have seen these, especially when the air currents especially when the air currents make the pupa movements almost imperceptible. The magic of imagining cells remaking the world through a new body, a beautiful flutter flower. Last summer, I met sidewalk sellers. One of them helped me to document the butterflies, a teenager who assisted me during my visit. This winter, he saw me in the alley and came to help me again. Also, he told me how some people cut the branches, and he tried to make them aware that butterflies live there. His friend, a young woman who works there, was helping us too. Sometimes, when street vendors help me, we pause to take pictures if they get customers, from back to attend the customer, and then return to help me. On a different day, Rodrigo, a bypasser, was curious about what I was checking on the plants. It turned out that he was a biologist, and he was interested in helping me to check the butterflies when I'm not in the city. Now we have connected through the butterflies, and it feels good to work with other people. This multi-species anthropology is vital for the communities that lack access to institutions. It bridges communities to other disciplines instead of understanding human culture as if they were self-constructed and not part of an ecosystem. Is culture possible without an ecosystem? In downtown Mexico City, people don't have enough green areas, trails, and parks. As a result, it's hard for people to reconnect with nature and feral species such as butterflies. However, I have observed that people gain interest in learning about their species once they have access. On the day I left the country, I visited the alley again. A guy approached me as I was checking the branches to find caterpillars. He identified himself as the person who buys the plants. He expressed his frustration of not knowing what to do to stop people from damaging the plants. It is a challenge to figure it out in an alley where thousands of people weekly transit. He's a non-Chinese medicine doctor in El Barrio Chino that volunteers to beautify the alley. When I met him, he and his employees from the clinic were hanging Chinese paper lanterns in the alley to prepare for the Chinese New Year celebration while they posed for my lens. So I also did this video with the butterflies.
Thank you, Vero. That's it. You want to add some final words? That was just such a magical video. Unreal. Unreal that those butterflies survive and thrive in that environment. Thank you for that. Anybody has questions for Vero?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
This is kind of part two, because last year for this event you did part one. So if you were to kind of talk about the connection between last year's presentation and this year's, is there anything you could say about that?
Yes, I've been trying to meet the people that buy the plants, the host plant. On the first year, actually, I was connected to an entomologist, and he was telling me that it's very, very rare to find this kind of butterfly down in Mexico, because they usually live or migrate here within Florida area. And so I think I still developing some questions about it. And first I was trying to find out who are the people or the institutions that are putting those plants there, because it's only that host plant where they, just like the monarch butterfly, it has this specific host plant for the caterpillars. So there is not other plants that they are looking for. So when there are more pots, more butterflies come. And what I noticed is that because the climate change, it's very unpredictable, the rainy seasons. This winter, it was so dry that I saw that many of them, they just go into the chrysalis and they just die there, dry. So I think I still, it's some sort of a side project, and I really like the images and thinking that just being in the center of Mexico City, where specifically that alley, seems like every weekend it's thousands of people that walk by, and sometimes they don't see the butterflies because they are there. They look just like flowers or petals hanging on the plants.
And are these people buying the plants specifically to have the butterflies come, or is it just accidental that they buy those plants?
It's accidental. I asked the doctor, I asked him if he knows that there are butterflies, and he said, no, I have never seen them. And I'm like, yeah, they are. All the plants that you are buying, they get full of eggs in different, especially in rainy season. And there are caterpillars, there are all the stages. That's another thing that the entomologist was telling me, that it's hard to see all the stages in the same place.
It's such a hopeful project. I find it's a project full of hope when you see butterflies thriving in the middle of Mexico City. It's a metaphor for for so many things. So thank you so much. You are the poet today. Any other questions for Vero? I see that some people have left, probably to have dinner. So we're not going to hacer la larga, as we say in Spanish, but I just want to thank everybody. Ameyalli, who's not here, and her colleagues, Zoe, Brent, Lavender, and Vero, for the presentations. Thank you for your time and sharing all of your findings and your projects with us. This is really wonderful. You know, I think of the variety of presentations today, right? Even though there were only 5 of them, it's just like, not only we went all over the world, but it's just it's such a myriad of interest and topics and angles and focus, right? That it's just, to me, it's like the endless understandings and possibilities and interpretations of the human experience and beyond the human experience. And that's what I think it's so, to wax poetic, that is so enticing of anthropology, right? That it can be so personal and so profound, right? At so many levels. And and easy to share as well. I think it's a language that can be very accessible to everyone. So thank you so much. And special thanks for Isaac and Eileen, who were the people behind the scenes, pulling the levers and dealing with the cables. And Fred and Mariela, of course, because Fred and Mariela get our department going and these special days and moments that we can share possible for us. So thank you, everybody.